Welcome to another episode of The Global Fandemic, a series of interviews between MatchPint and global sports leaders looking at the impact that COVID-19 has had on social sports viewing and the trends that are emerging, which will help you get ahead of the game in 2021. Our guest today is Lourenco Arriaga, Marketing Manager for Budweiser and Bud Light here in the UK. Those two brands between them hold a huge range of sports sponsorships, always been a key part of their strategy. Today, we'll be discussing Budweiser's partnership with the Premier League and La Liga, celebrating Lionel Messi's record-breaking achievements this year, and moving into esports with Bud Light. Lourenco, welcome to MatchPint and the Global Fandemic.
Thanks, Dom. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. And I think the place to start for me, Lourenco, is, Budweiser, Bud Light, your beer brands, you are part of the fabric of social sports viewing, beer in people's hands, in pubs and stadiums and in people's homes. Sport is a very social event. And of course, over the last 12 months, pubs have been closed, stadiums empty. So, how have you gone about fan engagement around your sports assets in the last year in light of all of those social restrictions which we've had?
Well, I think so. There's been a couple of phases to this, right? One is when football essentially stopped, and that happened in lockdown one, and then football and all types of sports, and then professional sports being back, but us being in lockdown again. I think we approached that first lockdown and essentially people missing sports as a form of entertainment when they maybe needed it the most and more than ever before, as almost, we need to play a role in bringing something which is entertaining to people's lives. And we got at it by leveraging some of those sponsorships to put out entertaining content. So we did the Bud Light England pub quiz, which was in, I think, May or June last year. Professional football wasn't back yet. And we essentially wanted to bring people a new form of entertainment, but still linked to football, to the sponsorships we have. So we leveraged essentially our England sponsorship and brought a new form of entertainment to people, which was very interactive, very engaging. We had John Barnes and Ray Parler hosting or co-hosting, and I think it was great for everyone who participated. And then eventually football, of course, came back, but came back in a very different shape. And I think what we've been doing since then is, like you said, we live in people's houses. We are a great complement to football. And I think what people miss the most is indeed that experience of being in the pub with a freshly poured pint, the atmosphere. And we can't replicate absolutely everything, but we have been trying to replicate as much as we can of that pub experience in home, right? So we've been running some promotions and pushing our perfect draft experience, which is essentially a draft machine in home, and trying to, as much as we can, get people to relive that experience of a freshly poured pint whilst watching football in home. And that is, if I bring it back to beer, but beyond that, just providing all sorts of engaging experiences in ways that people can interact with each other, and also with footballers, because we do get that access, of course, through sponsorships, and just try to provide a bit of relief, I guess, through sports and through sponsorships to people who are essentially stuck at home.
So what was that process like, talking about the things like the pub quiz and the draft experience at home? Previously, you would have been in a brilliant office in London talking with your colleagues about what to do. Now it's remote, your talent is remote, your colleagues are remote, your agencies are remote. What were some of the challenges you faced in actually activating that content?
Well, I'll be honest, I don't think the challenges we had were so much related to being at home, because I think we all got used to the new reality and the new rituals of working very quickly. We all understood very quickly that we could get, especially in positions where you don't necessarily need to be in the office. Marketing positions, our agencies the same. So we quickly understood we could get almost as much done from home as we could have done in the office, even if it's not as pleasant, right? But I think the challenge was more how quickly we had to do things, right? So the Bud Light pub quiz, as an example, it was a new format, right? It was an interactive pub quiz using a quiz technology where you essentially reply to questions live. There's a live leaderboard that's being hosted live on YouTube or streamed live on YouTube. And getting that ready in what was, from the moment we decided to go until being live in 3 weeks was, a nightmare in all honesty. But we got there in the end with a few technical glitches, as you would. But the funny thing is, with technical glitches, people started accepting them more as well, right? So we started seeing live interviews on TV, on national TV, with people, in at home through Zoom, and those glitches just became a part of reality, right? So we just understood that those were fine. People would accept them. We just needed to get stuff done, and needed to be able to entertain people with new formats of entertainment. So I think the challenges with this has been more, constantly reacting to what is an unexpected reality, because we've all, we now all see further lockdowns coming, but we never know exactly when they're going to happen, how strict they are. So it's more the speed of reaction, regardless of being at home or in the office, which has been a challenge. But we've been able to overcome most of it with strong teamwork.
Have there been any sort of guiding principles in terms of the type of content or the type of activations that you want to execute, which might be slightly different to what you would have done outside of lockdown? Have you had a kind of any guiding principles or philosophies around, like, here's the type of content that we need to create in order to bring fans together around our brands?
Yeah, I think it's been down essentially to, first of all, interactivity, right? So ensuring that whatever we're putting out there, whenever possible, is not one way. It gets people talking to each other, people talking to us as the brands, people talking to their idols, if possible, right? So, whenever we're able to get some sort of interactive content out there, that's been, I think, a focus. Secondly, I'd say, a huge focus on entertainment, right? So, ensuring that we are providing some sort of relief by, either putting a smile on people's faces or just ensuring they can, potentially with a fresh beer, relax at the end of a long day and watch something different, because everyone's, I think, gone through the entire Netflix catalog and there's nothing else to watch. So if we have been able, whenever we can, to put something out there which is entertaining and fresh, that's been, I think, a guiding principle as well. But then I'd say the last point is we're still trying to be true to our brands in terms of what they stand for, what their purposes are. And I think that's sort of the final check we always do, which is, regardless of how entertaining this is, of the virality it could get and so on, does it reflect the brand's values and the brand purpose? If yes, then we go for it. If not, then we go back into the drawing board.
That's really interesting, I suppose, when you think about brands like those that you look after, Budweiser and Bud Light, which are massive global brands with very strong US heritage. And you have then, obviously in every market, little wrinkles about, whether that be the UK, Colombia, Japan, there's going to be a kind of unique local culture. How do you marry up those two things, the kind of global values and positioning and heritage of a brand versus the local relevance?
Yeah, I think this is a well-known struggle for all global brands in any category, right? But with things like with things like local sponsorships, especially, we do have to prioritize a bit, credibility and ensuring that we are coming across as a brand that has the right to hold that property of sponsorship, let's say. I think that the best example we have is Bud Light in England, right? Bud Light is it's the most sold beer in America. It is globally known for being American, as is Budweiser. And I think England football fans might react at a first instance with a bit of doubt on whether or not it makes sense for a brand like Bud Light to sponsor the English national team. But I think, what we try to do is we keep true to Bud Light's personality and tone of voice, but then we adapt the strategy to ensure not only that we're leveraging that sponsorship, but also that through our messaging, through our creative, we are being as relevant and credible as we can be. And what we essentially do is we ensure we work with the right people, the people that give the brand a voice in the local market in the UK in this instance, to ensure that every piece of content we're putting out there is clearly coming from a brand that knows English football inside out, and not just a brand which is trying to tag itself to English football. And we see that in consumer research, right? The fact that, and we sort of defined this objective, which is ultimately Bud Light needs to come across as another England football fan. And I can resonate to this because I'm Portuguese and I often have to be an England football fan as well. And I've become a much bigger England football fan than I was before. But if it's a way just to ensure that we check that we're doing the right thing. So if what Bud Light is saying, whether it's on a digital post or a billboard and out of home, could be said by an England fan, then I think we're doing the right thing. But still being true to the brand's tone of voice and personality globally. So I think it's that trade-off or that balance that we constantly try to achieve.
You talked about the credibility of the sponsorship assets that you have. We've spoken about England, Bud Light, and so on. I mean, you have a long history of sports partnerships and sponsorships, both now with Budweiser sponsors the Premier League, sponsors La Liga, sponsors the FA. Bud Light sponsors the England team, sponsors Esports, but then you've also got this kind of heritage of NFL and basketball where you've got, Budweiser, Bud Light, and actually across the kind of AB InBev portfolio, things like Michelob Ultra has been really heavily involved in the NBA relaunch over the last, 12 months and so on as well. What is it about sports partnerships and sports sponsorship which means that you keep going back to that well and keep driving these partnerships? Because they're clearly a very, very integral part of your strategy.
I think, first and foremost, I think it's just the natural relationship that beer and sports have had for God knows how long, right? It's I think since forever, since both sports and beer exist. I think watching any type of big sports, especially team sports, in any country, US and the UK as an example, just naturally goes with the beer, whether that is in a stadium, whether that is in a pub or a bar, or whether that is at home. There's just a natural relationship between sports and beer, which we can't ignore. But then I think, partly driven by that, but not only, it's a passion point. It doesn't really get bigger than sports in terms of the passion it drives. And I think whenever, brands are able to activate sports properties with relevance, and I think that's probably the key word here is relevance. It usually works. It usually pays off. It brings value to the fans. It brings value to the brands. It brings value to the property, whether that is a club or a league. It makes business sense for everyone, and it's just a very natural relationship that we simply cannot ignore. And of course, ultimately, when we look at the more hard business metrics, we see that there is a strong return on investment whenever we do things in sports, and it just makes sense.
Talk to us a bit more about that. How do you evaluate that return on investment? I appreciate that you can't talk about kind of specific metrics and details, but what goes into that evaluation, and how do you begin to put a value on that sponsorship or that partnership?
Well, on a high level, I think there's two things we evaluate, right? One is the sports watching occasion itself, and how we perform within that sports watching occasion, and plenty of data goes into that. But we aim to grow as a house of brands in that massive beer drinking occasion, which is sports watching, and that is clearly a metric we evaluate on a yearly basis and make sure that we are delivering against our more, let's say, commercial objectives. The second one is how it drives the equity of the brand, right? And that is a balance you need to strike, because mainstream sports like football in the UK, they don't necessarily carry a lot of premium value with them. So whenever you activate something like that, you need to be careful that the investment you're putting in it and how you're doing it is right, but then also that the way you're activating it is bringing value and premiumness into the property itself. I think that's a bit what we aim to do with for example, the Premier League in the UK. But it's, I would say, ultimately a balance of how we perform in that occasion and how we perform in terms of the equity of the brand and what sports brings to that equity.
That's really interesting. I mean, just seeing kind of the way in which Budweiser treat the Premier League partnership compared to maybe some brands that have previously, treated that. How would you describe the kind of the unique strategy or positioning that Budweiser brings to that football sponsorship that some of the more value brands that have been associated with football in the past in the UK have brought? What is that? What is that? How do you build that equity, or how have you built that equity in a different way to those value brands, and how have you measured that?
It's a really good question. I mean, we like to call it internally premium beer for premium football, right? Because I think the EPL is, the very interesting thing about the EPL is I think it's seen as a lot more of a premium property outside of the UK than it is within the UK, because in the UK it's just the national league, right? It's the league everyone watches and follows. But the moment you go outside of the UK, whether that is in Asia, where it's massive, or in the rest of Europe, or in the Americas, it carries a lot more premiumness with it, partly because of the quality of the football and the quality of the talent, but then partly also just because of the production level, right? I mean, the EPL's production level is just, much, much higher, maybe only compared to the Champions League, than I think any other football league in Europe, not comparing to some of the American sports. So, we have that challenge in the UK, because in the UK, it's not necessarily seen as premium football like it is everywhere else. But then we try to ensure we bring that premiumness ourselves into the property or the league. And we do that in a number of ways, right? First of all, is just ensuring that our execution across all touch points, whether that is a campaign, piece of packaging, it doesn't really matter, is premium in its look and feel. But then we go well beyond that with content, right? And I think the best example, we have a few examples, but maybe the best one is Side Hustles, which is, you know, fully sort of funded and you know, produced by Budweiser in partnership with the Zone and Tentos, a number of partners in the UK. But then again, not only the element of storytelling and the fact that people got to see another side of footballers that they wouldn't see otherwise, but then also the quality of the production, the very entertaining nature of the content meant we were activating the Premier League in a very different way to the brands that preceded us in sponsoring the Premier League, right? So it's ultimately a lot about what we do with that sponsorship and the value and the content that we bring to EPL fans.
And you chose some amazing partners on that. I mean, I'm thinking of Lourenco in particular. You know, how did you go about identifying those? You know, because you've got your league partners, you know, the Premier League, and then you've got the talent partners here. You know, you want to do something in partnership with Ellie. So, you know, how did you go about that with Tentos in identifying what was the right talent to tell these stories?
I think there's a couple of things, right? One is we were looking for talents that resonates with Budweiser's own sort of purpose and values of ambition, of you know, seizing the opportunity, and that's sort of step number one, which is ensuring, you know, the talent we're using matches and shares those values. But then, you know, within, I think, the topic of the series, which was, you know, about footballers' side hustles and what they do in their professional endeavors beyond football, we wanted people with really interesting stories, and all three of them, you know, had amazing sort of business ventures, which were very sort of their own in terms of, you know, what they were doing. It's, you know, it's business ventures that are clearly not there to make money because it's not necessarily something they need, but more because they really wanted to put their passion into it. And ultimately, I think, you know, we went to look for those footballers that had amazing stories to tell on what they were doing in business beyond football. And Ming, Lourenco, and Zaha were, you know, by far the best choices we found out there.
So you talked about, I'm so interested in this point that you made about the premium perception of the Premier League in the UK versus other territories. And I think there's probably something that within your blood as a business, you also understand, because I think there is a similar kind of thing with American sports. You know, I think in the UK, I certainly look at the NFL and think, wow, that is an incredibly premium product. But I also know from speaking with people involved in the NFL and you guys at BBG and my experience talking to American friends, that there is sometimes quite a different perception of the NFL. You know, it's a kind of working class game in many ways, or the fan base is you know, it's both premium and value sort of at the same time. You've got these big Super Bowl, but then you also have the kind of the local community getting together in sports bars and just chewing the fat on a Sunday evening as they watch their team. And one of the things that I think is really interesting in the sponsorships that Budweiser has with the Premier League and La Liga is I sense there is almost a similar sort of thing. I think we look at La Liga as being quite premium because it has Ronaldo, or did have Ronaldo, but certainly has Messi, Barcelona, Real Madrid. We sort of see these absolute giants of the game, and we don't spend much time thinking about Getafe or Real Sociedad. Whereas probably similarly, if you're in Spain, you look at Man City and Liverpool and you don't think much about West Brom versus Everton on a Tuesday evening. And one of the ways in which I think that has definitely been seen this year is in the way in which you activated the Lionel Messi record-breaking achievement, where he broke Pele's record for the most amount of goals. And just tell us a little bit about what that campaign was and how you arrived at that campaign.
We went into a partnership with Messi, again, very much driven by the fact that we understood he shared, you know, I think what he achieved, given where he came from, is just, you know, it's a massive story in itself. But if you go back to what his career was, hard work, loyalty to the club, a huge amount of ambition, all of that, I think is exactly what Budweiser stands for as a brand. So, we went into a partnership with Messi and understood that record was, would be broken. It was only a matter of time until he scored the famous 6-4 goals. And we thought that's exactly the sort of feat which symbolizes and recognizes a lifetime of hard work and ambition and going for it, and we need to find a way to celebrate that. So I think the really exciting thing is the way we decided to celebrate that was to send bottles to all the goalkeepers that he scored those 6-4 goals against. And in a way, you could almost think, well, but you're embarrassing the goalkeepers, right? Because you're sending, some goalkeepers would get 20 bottles because Messi scored 20 goals against them. But the matter of fact is, I think what we saw happening is just recognizing a genius, right? And the goalkeepers were willingful to participate in this because it was a moment of celebration of what Messi and Ronaldo have achieved. In this case, Messi, but I think both of them together have achieved in terms of taking football to a next level. So I think even if it might have been slightly embarrassing to some of those goalkeepers given the amount of bottles they had, everyone was sort of willing to cooperate and celebrate this amazing achievement, which had been in place for 50 years, something like that. So we ended up having a few interviews with the likes of Buffon and so on, describing what the experience was to play against Messi and the greatness that he's achieved, and ultimately I think an amazing campaign to bring that partnership to life with Messi.
And yet at the other end of the spectrum, kind of, I guess, the most recent bit of work that I've seen from Budweiser in the UK was, Messi, global superstar, recognizable all across the world by probably a couple of billion football fans. Right at the other end of the spectrum, you've got this tiny little club called Marine FC who made it through to the FA Cup third round. Super local, no one in Buenos Aires is going to know anything about Marine FC. So tell us a little bit about that activation and because that's completely the different end of the scale in terms of kind of PR and reactive content.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it doesn't really matter, I guess, as long as we go back to the same point about sharing the purpose and sharing the values, right? And I think with what Marine FC achieved was only achieved once ever in the history of the FA Cup, which is 100 and I can't even remember, but I think 120 plus years old. And again, when we saw Marine FC, we are sponsors of the FA Cup, of course, let's start there. But then when we saw Marine FC achieving, what only one other team has ever achieved before, we thought, we need to celebrate this. It's an amazing feat. It's a recognition again of extraordinary ambition and then seizing an opportunity which doesn't come around that often. And we decided, we need to do something to congratulate Marine FC. And then, of course, the very famous episode with the goalkeeper going to a local co-op to buy beers to be able to celebrate happened and went viral on Twitter. And we thought, well, who better than a beer brand to ensure that they never have to do that again? So the whole idea was, we need to put a fridge full of beer in their locker room to ensure that whenever they achieve, an amazing success again, and I'm sure it's going to happen very often if they did what they did in the FA Cup, they don't have to go to the local store to buy beer. The beer will be there. So it just made a lot of sense, partly because of that sharing of values and what they achieved, but then also because beer was central to the story, and we thought we needed to do something to ensure we cheer the guys up. So for the Tottenham game in the third round, the fridge was there in in their locker room. And even though they didn't go through, I'm sure they had a few beers to celebrate where they got in the FA Cup.
So just to finish, there's one thing that I really want to talk about, and it's linked in some ways to what you were just saying, that, you know, beer is kind of at the center of football culture, or if not at the center, certainly, you know, it's very much within football culture. Goalkeeper going out to buy beers at the local supermarket, etc. As we look ahead to some of the trends that are emerging, there's one that I really want to hear you speak about, which is esports. And, you know, I think we're aware that esports has been growing as a proposition over the last 3 to 5 years, longer. And yet, to a lot of people, it still feels like a kind of underground movement ready to explode. And yet, Bud Light, globally recognizable beer brand, and you might not necessarily think gaming beers, partly because if you're gaming, presumably at a competitive level, beer is not the ideal thing for your performance. But certainly for fans, which is growing and so on, you know, that seems like such an interesting partnership for people. So, you know, most of all, I'd love to hear why are Bud Light investing heavily in esports, and how is that showing up? How are you activating those partnerships?
Well, we you know, first of all, Bud Light, you know, naturally skews to a bit of a younger target audience. It's a fun, light brand, and you know, it has been a growing, again, going back to the conversation about passion points, a massively growing passion point for a few years. And Bud Light has been quite active globally, especially in the US, in the UK, also in Russia, China, a number of markets, in, you know, in activating esports and being present in esports, because it's not only a passion point, but it's an occasion, right? And a lot of what happens in gaming and esports is not necessarily professional competitive esports, but it's, you know, all your streamers on Twitch and so on, which is also a beer drinking occasion, right? If you're watching a stream on Twitch, that's as good a beer drinking occasion as if you're watching a football match on TV. So there's obviously that element there, but then I think it's more about the passion which people put into esports, right? And of course, you know, lockdown only accelerated the trend, even if it was there well before lockdown, but it clearly accelerated its growth. We had been planning our next steps in esports for a while, but of course we also accelerated those with the acceleration as a result of COVID. But you know, what we said in the beginning was, you know, we need to do this in a big way, and we need to get it right, because it's very, very easy to get things wrong in esports and gaming. You know, you can easily be called out on not being credible or not doing things the right way, as a number of big global brands have. And so we set out to do a number of firsts, almost, I would say. So first of all, we did the first ever, as far as we know, FMCG on-pack promo on esports in Europe. And we thought that was a way to show, look, we're serious about this. You know, esports is not just something we want to tag ourselves onto. It's something we want to bring value to. So we partnered with Fnatic to be able to do that on-pack promotion. Fnatic's been an amazing partner to work with. We put out some, you know, money can't buy prizes in that promotion, and, you know, was taken up very, very quickly and adamantly by esports fans in last year and January this year. So that was sort of the first and sort of big thing we wanted to do. But then, you know, like, ultimately, what's really going to make a difference, I think, is the content you generate and how you position yourself as a brand in the networks which people that like esports and follow esports use. You know, so Twitch, Reddit, Twitter, and so on. And yeah, I think that's when the idea of, you know, how can we credibly, carve our place in esports. We went back to the archives and we thought, you know, who better than the Bud Knight? You know, the Bud Knight is a medieval character. He's been around for a while. We didn't just create him to go into esports. So he's an asset of the brand that people know, became very famous, even in the UK, of course, more in the US, with the Super Bowl ad, the Game of Thrones Super Bowl ad. So we thought, the guy is theoretically dead because we killed him in the Super Bowl ad, but we can respawn him. Instead of bringing him back to life, we'll just bring him back to life in the world of gaming and esports. So we brought him to life on Twitter. We did again with a Fnatic partnership, a little stunt with Harry Hesketh, the FIFA player, where he came into a room, and when we recorded the thing, actually Harry didn't know he was coming in, which was fun. So massive knight, 2 meters tall, coming into the room where he was playing. He knew he was being recorded. He just didn't know the Bud Knight was coming in. But then we had to take it a step further, right? Which is, this is all nice, but again, we need to do something that hasn't been done before, and we need to do it, where esports fans and gamers are. So we set out to get the Bud Knights in a bit of Stig manner, so no one knows who is behind the suit, and that's the whole point. Maybe one day we'll reveal it, maybe not. But we got the Bud Knight into gaming and actually streaming. So in partnership with Twitch, we got the Bud Knight playing Apex Legends, a popular game out there. And people absolutely loved it. We had, I think, 350,000 views, UK views, over 3 nights. We had 3 nights of streaming. And I think what people loved was, number one, the surprise effect, right? No one was expecting, a lot of your Twitch watchers, they're jumping from stream to stream. And all of a sudden, there's a Knight, or the Bud Knight, for those of them who knew the Bud Knights, playing games. Then I think the fact that he was, a hilarious character. The Bud Knight is known for his double meaning jokes and quite dry humor. And I think that got people's attention right away. But then to cap it off, he was actually an amazing player as well. So I think that's maybe what people didn't expect is, okay, this is all very nice, but I'm sure he sucks. And by the way, he's playing in a massive armor, so how can he play well? But he actually won, I can't remember the exact number, but I think out of 12 or 13 Apex Legend games, which has 20 teams playing against each other, he won 3 or 4 of those games, which is pretty amazing performance. So yeah, overall, I think an amazing way to sort of go bigger into esports, again, with credibility, with relevance, with fresh content that people loved. And, maybe there's going to be more of it. Who knows?
Lourenco, it has been just fascinating hearing you talk about such an extraordinarily wide range of sporting activations, from huge global initiatives like Lionel Messi's record-breaking to tiny little activations like Marine FC, and then looking ahead to Bud Light and the Bud Night and esports. I think it's the way in which you are able to jump from asset to asset and hold all of that together in a way which, as you have said, tries to retain credibility of both the brand, but also authenticity with the partnership asset is really exciting, and so much interesting insight there from you about how you have handled the last year and what are some of the processes in place that are going to help you take everything to the next level in 2021. So thank you so much for your time, Lourenco. Really, really appreciate you coming on and talking to us, and very best of luck in 2021.
Thanks, Dom. Massive pleasure. Thank you very much.